former CWA World Heavyweight Champion, as well as a former NWA Florida Heavyweight Champion. You may know him as a former WWF/WWE superstar. He is, of course, Duke, the Dumpster Droese. Mr. Droese, welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, obviously, I think a lot of people do remember you from your time in the WWF, 2 to 3 years there in that time period. But kind of what are you doing today? Because I keep seeing you pop up, and it looks like a return in 2019. You returned to wrestling and a return to kind of the quote-unquote sports entertainment business.
Well, I'm doing it, I'm kind of a weekend warrior right now. I'm doing it, just having fun with it, doing weekend shows for the most part, doing autograph sessions, doing some wrestling, kind of on a limited basis because, of course, I had my left foot amputated in 2013, but I'm still able to get around and wrestle in a match. So that's what I'm doing as far as the wrestling business. Now, I've got a regular weekday 9 to 5 shoot job. I work for a drug court program here in Middle Tennessee where I live. So that's what I do during the week. And then usually on weekends, I'll do something wrestling related, whether it's a convention or going out and doing some wrestling shows.
How does it feel kind of getting back out there? Because if I remember correctly, you hadn't wrestled for quite a while.
Yeah, it has been a long time. It's fun. It's fun just doing it. There's no pressure involved. I'm not trying to be in the big leagues or anything like that. I'm just, like I said, I'm having fun with it. And so there's no pressure. It definitely hurts, though. I'm not getting any younger. I'm damn 51 years old, so I feel it. But I've tried to get myself back into decent shape and before I started doing this. So I think I gave myself, I made it easier on myself in that respect. But still, man, getting in that ring and doing what wrestlers do, it can be rough. So, but I'm not doing it every day of the week like these guys are working full-time schedules and stuff. So it's a lot easier.
Now, you mentioned the left foot being amputated. You look like you're in tremendous shape. Is that kind of a hard adjustment for you? Is it obviously harder to wrestle, being like that?
It is different. I definitely cannot wrestle like I did, in the mid-90s. There's a lot of things that I can't do just because the foot's not there and it's different. But I'm still able to move pretty well. The only real issues I've had with the foot, I've had my prosthetic get caught in the ropes when somebody threw me out, or it got caught in the stairs when I was walking up the steps one time. But I just had to kind of cover it up and keep moving. And 2 weeks ago, I worked here locally in Pikeville, Tennessee, and I was wearing these boots, and they were kind of cheap, I guess, and high-tech magnums, and the soles ripped off of them when I was doing a corkscrew elbow, and it went shooting across the room we were wrestling in. So, but there's different issues with it, but I just kind of work around, and I'm learning as I go, and I work around the issues that I might have.
And I also see you winning championships. So not only are you back, you make a return to the ring after a long time, but then you start winning championships.
Yeah, I've been working with this group, as I was saying, Pikeville, Tennessee. It's the TWA, Tennessee Wrestling Alliance, and I had a match like last week and wrestled for the championship and won. So it's been fun. I'm having a good time with it, and I like these guys because on any off weekends where I don't have something booked, they use me. So it's a nice little local place to work and get in the ring and try different things and continue improving on what I'm trying to do in the ring.
I think these guys are a lot different than your era, like these new independent wrestlers.
Yeah, it is different. It's a lot different. I think these guys, well, I can't make a very general sweeping statement, but a lot of guys are worried about getting their stuff in and doing the high flying or whatever the case may be. But I will say with these guys at the TWA in Pikeville, it's more geared towards old school, old style professional wrestling, and I do enjoy that.
And what's interesting with you is the WWF run. I think so many people remember you as Duke the Dumpster and making your debut in the WWF and excuse me, and kind of getting your way in there. But how did you actually get into, before WWF obviously, how did you actually get into the wrestling business? Was that something you always wanted to do? Were you kind of like a lifelong fan that always wanted to get in it?
I was pretty much a lifelong fan. I grew up down in Miami, Florida, and I watched championship wrestling from Florida. And then, of course, it got taken over by WCW, and I watched those shows. But then I remember WrestleMania 1, my dad took me to the Miami Beach Convention Center to watch WrestleMania 1 on closed-circuit television because there was no pay-per-view in those days. You had to go to an arena and watch it on a big movie screen, basically. And that was the moment I knew I wanted to do it. And, while I was still in high school, I found a wrestling school and basically started learning. And slowly but surely got into the independent scene in Florida for quite a while, and then eventually worked my way up to working for Vince McMahon.
And as far as getting into the WWF, how did you actually kind of get in? Because there's always different stories from different guys about, they were recruited by Pat Patterson, or Jerry Briscoe saw them, or Vince himself, somehow, some way, recruited you. Like, did somebody actually recruit you into the WWF, or how did you actually get in the door?
No, I didn't. I didn't really know anybody there. I knew Luna Vachon because she was out of Florida, and I knew her from the independent circuit, just kind of in passing. I wasn't good friends with her, but I knew I was going to have to do something different to get a shot because I really didn't know anybody. And what I did is I was already wrestling as the Garbage Man, Rocco Gibraltar down in Florida, so I put together a promo package with tapes and a resume and photos and 8x10s and all that, and I was going to travel the country and pass them out to promoters and try to get booked. But then what happened was, before I was getting ready to leave, I read in the paper there was a convention in the Miami Beach Convention Center where it's called the NatP Convention, where they had the TV executives coming and trying to buy and sell TV time for different shows. And both the WWF and WCW were there. So I kind of hatched a plan to get in there. I knew somebody that worked for a local public access, or not public access, but a local station, and he was an executive, so I got his credentials, and I put on a suit, and I walked in there, and I walked right up to Vince McMahon at the WWF booth and shook his hand and introduced myself and talked to him for, probably about what seemed like forever. It was probably about 45 seconds, and handed him my promotional package personally and got the hell out of there. And they called me, J.J. Dillon called me about a week later.
That is great, and that's kind of a unique story. You don't hear too many people, first of all, being as smart as you and kind of figuring out, okay, they're going to be here. This is the best way to get in front of them, best way to see them. But then you throw in the fact that I don't know if any people are as ballsy as you to go up to Vince and be like, here's my promo reel. I have that confidence, but be ballsy too. It's like, here's my promo reel. Here it is.
And the funny thing about it is I didn't, I had a friend that was also a local wrestler down there. It was one piece of advice I always remembered. He said, if you see Vince McMahon alone, you better jump on it because he won't be alone for long. And that was very true. He was off to the side drinking a cup of coffee. And, it all just kind of came together really fast, like literally overnight. I read one day that they were at the convention, and the next day I was putting on a suit and borrowing these credentials and walking through the front door. So I really didn't give myself time to get scared or intimidated. I just went and did it, so. That
is just awesome because you don't even get a chance to get intimidated or get scared or to, pussy out of it. So to speak.
Yeah, overthink it. Yeah, overthink it. That would be stupid. And I don't know if I would have or not, but I didn't give myself a chance. I just went in there and just did it. I think the only other guy to ever get hired kind of like that I know of was Oscar from Men on a Mission, he did a rap for Vince in an elevator, and he got hired. So I think we're the only two. And then after that, they really started, kind of keeping people away from Vince because word started getting out that people could walk up to Vince and get a job, and they didn't want the hassle. So I think they just kind of started surrounding him better.
Yeah.
People just have access to him. Yeah, of course.
Now, obviously, you get the call from J.J. Dillon. They love the promo reel. They love what they saw. What's on there? Kind of describe what exactly. Obviously, the Garbage Man, but just describe kind of the character.
Well, on the promo tape, I did three things. The first thing I did was an interview for some make-believe match. I was wrestling for a championship somewhere down there in Florida, and I just cut a promo where I was basically yelling. I sounded like Road Warrior Hawk because I was a big Road Warriors fan. And I cut a promo, and then the next section of it was just a highlight reel with music over it that came out amazingly good for as low budget as we put it together. And then the final part I'd put on there was just an entire match so they could see me wrestle in a match and see, kind of how my ring psychology worked and all that stuff. And that's basically it. But, yeah, me and my brother put the tape together with two VCRs and an I think it was an 8-track music recorder to lay music and stuff over it. And he did some sound effects like crowd cheering and stuff. But I just spliced together all these highlights on VCR tapes because that's pretty much all there was back then. It was still a VCR era, so.
That is great. That is so old school, and I kind of remember doing stuff like that. Not obviously at that level and that great, but you got to use a VCR tape. You got to splice in this, and you got to do that. It's just funny, the technology then just wasn't quite there, or we didn't really have great access to it anyway.
No, and I just did the best I could with what I had, and the funny thing about it is Shane McMahon came up to me at my tryout, and he asked me who did my tape. I said, me and my brother in his living room. And he just kind of looked at me like I was crazy. So apparently it was good. It was, a lot of it came together by luck, I will say that. So it was just, it turned out really good.
It is awesome that Shane sees it because that means that they're kind of passing it around. Everybody's getting a chance to look at it like, oh, look at this guy. Look at this tape. That's kind of pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. Funny thing is I didn't even know who Shane McMahon was at that moment. I was just being nice to everybody, but I didn't know who Shane was because when he talked about his dad, he called him Vince. And I didn't know who Shane was. He was just coming up and starting to work really a lot in the company. And what Shane was doing at that time was he was working for a certain period of time, like in each division of the company. And when I happened to get there, he was working in the studio. And he was the one that produced all my vignettes and stuff when I came in. We drove around together in the early morning hours in Stamford, Connecticut in winter in the freezing weather to cut promos and do the vignettes when I was coming to the WWF.
That is so cool, and I definitely want to talk about those vignettes in just 1 second. But when you actually kind of break through, and obviously everyone's seen the promo, J.J. Dillon calls you in, when does the name change happen? You know what I mean? When does Vince kind of sit down with you, and what does he say? Because apparently that's his thing, right? He wants to kind of brand you in the WWF. We here in the WWF want you to be this kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't Vince. It was Shane. It was Shane. The morning they flew me up to do vignettes, after I was hired and signed the contract, they flew me up to do vignettes to Stamford, Connecticut. And that morning I sat down with Shane, and he goes, we've been tossing around some ideas for names. I think we're going to go with Duke the Dumpster Droese. And that's my real last name. So I was like, oh, my mom's going to be so proud. And yeah, Shane got to know me pretty quick because I have an interesting sense of humor. But he told me that, and yeah, they changed the name obviously so they could own licensing rights and everything to it. But that was it. And then we just put together ideas for vignettes. He wrote some of them, I wrote some of them, and we were off to the races. But he was the one that informed me of the name change.
As far as the gimmick, you were doing Rocco, the Garbage Man, before. They obviously like what they saw from the tape. They like it. you're comfortable with the gimmick. Were you kind of surprised at all that they didn't really change much, or were you thinking that that's kind of the general direction it was going to go?
When I came up with the idea, it all started from just having a name. I was in a fraternity at the University of Miami, and the fraternity brothers, one of the fraternity brothers gave me the name Rocco Gibraltar, and I always just saved that in the back of my mind. But eventually, you know, I was just kind of sitting in my room at college one day, and I was working part-time on the independent circuit, and I was trying to come up with a new idea and a gimmick and a character, and I knew I wanted to use Rocco Gibraltar. So I started coming up with ideas that kind of rhymed, and the one I came up with was G-Man Rocco Gibraltar. And I was like, okay, is he going to be a G-Man like a federal agent, or is he going to be a G-Man like the Garbage Man? And then that's when I decided. I said it would be perfect for Vince McMahon's, you know, late 80s, early 90s WWF. He loves having big blue-collar baby faces, you know, and having a guy that the working man could relate to. It was perfect, and I knew it would be perfect. And that's when I started working on it in Florida and working on getting it over and figuring out how I wanted to do it. And, yeah, they just picked right up with it, and just all they did was change the name.
And carried around the trash can, and then you had those cool vignettes. Was that a lot of fun hanging out with Shane and doing those vignettes and kind of being able to show your creativity?
Yeah, it was a really cool experience. He allowed me to come up with a lot of stuff. He used basically everything I came up with, and then he added a couple. I think he came up with the one that was like the Michael Jordan commercial where he bounced off the thing and whatever off the side of the wall and nothing but net. And I did that thing at the dump. I threw it over the building, off the payloader, off the dumpster, and straight in the garbage or whatever it was. He came up with that one, and I think he came up with a couple where I was up in the middle of this huge pile of garbage kind of promo, and then I came up with the rest of them.
As far as when you get in the door and you're first starting in the WWF, is that intimidating at all? Is the locker room something that is a concern, or is everybody welcoming you in with open arms?
All the boys welcome you in with open arms. They're all really cool. I mean, of course, you got to be very careful because it's a very competitive atmosphere. But no, all the boys were really cool. It was a surreal experience being in a locker room with a lot of guys that I kind of grew up watching or came up through my own wrestling years watching as I was trying to get ready. They were the stars, but no, they were all really cool with me. The one person I had a problem with in the beginning was Chief Jay Strongbow. He for some reason felt like he needed to bully me, like because I was the new guy or something. I don't know, but he was kind of a dick. But other than that, everybody else was pretty cool. It's a very interesting dynamic when you first come in. You know, as you said, I was working on this gimmick in Florida for so many years, and I was getting it over, and I came in and tried to do a lot of the same things, and immediately certain people tried to change things, like Chief Jay Strongbow and other agents were trying to change the way I did things, and I was so worried about pissing people off, I changed a lot of things in the beginning, and it just didn't work for me, so I started changing back, you know, different things that I would do and the way that I would work in the ring and the way that I would get the crowd behind me. And but it was interesting. And I was definitely kind of marked out when I first started, just being in the locker room with a lot of those other guys. That was a cool experience.
Anybody that you kind of gravitated to early on and became a good friend or traveling buddy or roomie with?
The very first guys I rode with were Adam Baum and Bob Holly. And what I did is I tried to just kind of work around and meet different people and ride with different people to find who I could mesh with. I rode with the Doink and Dink the Clown and Luna Vachon in a car one time. Boy, that was an interesting experience. I rode with most of the guys at different times. There was times I rode with some of the Clique members like Shawn Michaels and, you know, Scott Hall and some of those guys, but that wasn't too often. I rode with X-Pac, well, he was 1-2-3 Kid then. We rode together on a couple of things. I rode with the Smoking Guns, Billy Gunn and Bart Gunn, in the beginning quite a bit. And then later on, as I moved along, I started riding with Bret Hart for quite a while, and I rode with Steve Austin quite a bit. That was later on, after Austin would come in.
Did you kind of gravitate to certain guys personality-wise, or just easier to travel with them? Or what's the psychology kind of behind certain guys you travel with sometimes and then kind of switching off and traveling with other guys?
It seemed like me and Austin were like two peas in a pod, man. It was just constantly cutting up, having a good time. We both like to drink beer and do a few other things here and there, and just have a good time. And he was kind of the same way I was. I rode with Bret. He was different. When I rode with Bret, it was because I was really frustrated, and I was really looking to him to get some advice. So I rode with him for a while, but it really was, he was really quiet a lot of the time and stuff like that. But always had a good time with Austin. Guys like when the Road Dogg first came in, when he was the roadie, he was always fun to hang with. We didn't really ride that much, but in the locker room, he was a trip. And those tend to be the kind of people I would hang out with. The guys that were funny, that had a good time, that didn't take themselves too seriously, because that's the way I was.
Did you ever think Steve Austin, the guy, you rode with and stuff, did you ever see that potential? Like, wow, yeah, he's going to be the biggest star in the business one day.
I knew he was going to be big. A lot of us did. And it's funny because I used to tell him that. I said, dude, just because, when you first start out, they kind of test you for, a year or 2 years or even 3 years before they really get behind you and start pushing you. In a lot of cases, they'll test you in different ways. They'll test your attitude. They'll test your work ethic. They'll test a lot of things. And early on, he was just, Austin was just like everybody else. He wasn't getting any huge push. He had that horrible gimmick as the ringmaster, and he hated it. And you could tell, and he was getting frustrated. And I used to always we'd be like at the bar in the hotel room, and we'd be talking, and I'd say, dude, you ain't got shit to worry about. They're going to fucking push you to the sky. And he was like, there's no way. He would always ask me how I knew that. And it's funny because, first of all, everybody knew he was going to be something big. But then, of course, later on, I would ride with either him or I'd ride with Bret Hart. And Bret Hart started talking about him. And when that happened, I knew, because it was just a matter of time before Bret wanted to work with him. So I used to tell him, because he was always kind of unsure, it seemed. He was like, how do you know that? And I was like, just trust me. And sure enough, it came to be. And, of course, he took it and just blew it up, man. And became, literally, I would say, the biggest star in the wrestling business, I would say.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, for sure. And then, of course, on the other end of the coin, Vince himself, later on down the road, became one of the biggest characters as far as being a heel and Mr. McMahon. But what was he like behind the scenes? Is he that evil genius that everyone kind of says he is? What were your opinions of Vince?
Vince is a very interesting person. When people would ask me that question, a lot of people are very bitter with their treatment and the things that Vince did from a business perspective. I always said Vince was a very shrewd businessman, and it's true. There were oftentimes Vince would make promises to people and then not fulfill the promise. He would go back and do something else. But if you really look at the wrestling business and you understand how it works, you realize, Vince could make a promise to somebody one day, and then literally some things happen in the company that changes the direction overnight, that forces them to have to change direction overnight. And they don't share all this information with all the boys. They kind of keep their cards close to the vest. They don't want to let too much information out. But in that way, there were lots of times when Vince would seemingly go back on promises, and that's where people would get pissed off. I was one of them. you know, he basically, the way I saw it, he was promising me a big push right before the Triple H thing started. But then, you know, it just happened the way it did. And then I kind of got all bent out of shape about it and didn't handle it right. And then I went right back to doing what I was doing before that, which was putting over all the new heels that came in. So I got really frustrated and basically talked myself out of the company. But you see why a lot of guys get very angry and bitter over it. But if you really understand what's going on, you understand how Vince works. He is a genius. I wouldn't necessarily say an evil genius. I would say he's a genius. He's obviously made the professional wrestling business what it is today, and he has survived a lot of nuclear bombs against his company, and still he has always survived. So regardless of what anybody wants to say bad about him, he was a very shrewd businessman, but he was a genius, is a genius. He just did what he had to do for his company, and that's it.
Hey, let's pause 1 second to tell you all about the benefits of using Blue Chew. Guys, remember the days when you were ready to go? Well, now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in the bedroom with a little help from the Triple Threat Podcast and the Two-Man Power Trip. So listen up. Blue Chew, extra function and more confidence where it counts, then Blue Chew is the fast and easy way to enhance your performance. Most guys talk a good game, but Blue Chew helps. Blue Chew is the better, cheaper, and faster choice, and we thank them for sponsoring our podcast.
And as far as that Triple H feud, it was a really long time feud with you and Triple H, and really Triple H was kind of undefeated for a bit before that. You were really his first loss, and obviously, you know, the Royal Rumble match in '96, Superstars. What were your kind of thoughts of Triple H at that point as you're going along in this long, bitter feud with him?
Professionally, I respected Triple H and his work. I enjoyed working with him. He was always willing to do anything, try new things in the ring. But he was protected, and I resented that. He was part of the clique, and I viewed him in a lot of ways as an ass kisser because he was part of that clique. And again, this is another thing. I've come to terms with the fact that looking in hindsight now, looking back at the way I acted, and regardless of what he did or who he was friends with, he handled his business perfectly. I often talk to people nowadays that are new in the business coming up, and they ask for advice. And one of the pieces of advice I always give people is, if you get a chance and you get up to a major company, look around, figure out who's got the power, and be buddies with them, because that is a fact. That is the way it works. If you've got powerful friends, you'll get great opportunities. He aligned himself with those guys because he saw, when he first came in, Triple H rode with a lot of guys too. I saw him. He rode with like Cactus Jack. He rode with Man Mountain Rock. He rode with these guys he knew from WCW. But eventually he smartened up and realized, okay, he needs to hang with the clique. And Scott Hall took a liking to him. I remember sitting at TV watching the monitor with Scott Hall watching Triple H wrestle somebody. And Scott Hall saying, I think I'm going to make him a project of mine. That was Scott's words. Exactly. And then after then, all of a sudden he was riding with those guys, and, he was getting better pushes, and he was protected, like I said. It's interesting. People always talk about me being the first loss Triple H had. Mm-hmm. He lost by DQ, and it was a goofy finish because at the time, I guess the president or the commissioner was Gorilla Monsoon, so we were wrestling in this free-for-all match. I guess it was before the SummerSlam or Royal Rumble. It was before the Rumble pay-per-view was coming because it determined who went in first and who went in 30th. We wrestled this free-for-all match, and he hit me with brass knucks, and he pinned me. And Gorilla came out and disqualified him. So I won the match. So he had to go in first, and I had to go out 30th.
Yep.
But I went out 30th, and he got eliminated within a few minutes, whereas he went out first, and he lasted quite a while, which made him stronger, and that was actually a better story for him. But, yeah, the only way I beat him was by count out. there were times where I pinned him when we were in the feud and we were working a lot of house shows together because we were trying different things, and they would put me over sometimes. But I knew on pay-per-view I wasn't going to beat him. I was not stupid. I knew how it worked. And I remember sitting in a limousine one time with Shawn Michaels before our pay-per-view, before I had the pay-per-view match with Triple H, because I was just kind of talking about some of my concerns. And it was interesting the way Shawn was kind of listening to me. But I looked at Shawn right in the eyes and I said, listen, Shawn, I'm not stupid. I know I'm not going over on Hunter. And he just kind of looked at me and goes, well, yeah, you're right. And I said, but we can do it in such a way where I don't get killed, you know. And then, of course, they came up with that stupid fuck finish where he hit me with the lid and all that stuff. And it just didn't seem like we were going anywhere else with it. And I got really frustrated. But I wasn't, you know, I knew how it worked for the most part. I just didn't conduct myself very well after that point. But, yeah, my breaking his winning streak was by disqualification.
Yes, that is true. And then not only does he kind of keep beating you in the feud, he cuts your hair, then you lose again at In Your House 6 pay-per-view. It definitely was going in his favor, so to speak.
You know, it was a funny story. I remember, you know, I was having meetings with Vince as we're working up to it, and I just kept saying, you know, they said, we're going to put you in this feud and whatever, and I was getting into really good physical shape, and Vince always appreciated that. I just remember sitting there, and I said, you know, I would kind of like to get away from being the happy-go-lucky hillbilly Jim garbage man character. I'd like to turn heel, and I'd like to change my appearance. And immediately, we were sitting there, and it was me, it was Vince, I think Jerry Briscoe was there, and I know Jim Ross was there. And Jim Ross chimed in, and this is before I knew Jim Ross was taking over talent relations. He hadn't taken it over yet, but he was getting ready to. But he chimed in and he goes, well, why don't we do this? He said, why don't we set up an angle where Triple H cuts your hair and we can turn you heel after all this is said and done, and we turn you heel and you got your new appearance, but we can use it to heat up the angle. And I looked right at Vince and I said, Vince, I'm willing to do this as long as I get some kind of revenge. And I said, I know I'm not going to cut his hair, but as long as you give me some revenge that makes me look strong in the end so I can move on. And Vince said, yes, absolutely. So this is one of the instances where I felt like he kind of went back on a promise. But he said, yes, absolutely. And that was my expectation. And then, again, we got to the pay-per-view, and the night before, one of the agents calls me and goes, oh, he's going to hit you in the face with the lid and pin you. I went, well, you know, and then nothing. And then they put him with Mark Marrow. Well, then he lost to the Ultimate Warrior in 12 seconds or whatever it was. And then they put him with Mark Marrow, so I knew I was done with that. So, but yeah, that's how it all went down.
Interesting, the inner politics that go on, and especially things promised, things changed, the protected guys versus not protected, the politics. It's funny, the backstage atmosphere in wrestling that you don't really, as a fan, don't realize that it exists until that, like, you know, that intense point. You don't realize it.
One of the biggest things is people don't realize getting into this business is, man, you got to have a thick skin. You got to be able to handle rejection and people going back on promises, and you got to handle it properly and not lose your shit. Because I started losing it, man. I started getting really irrational and pissed off. And, of course, I was drinking more and I was doing more drugs, and it just kind of escalated. And, you know, I think during that time with Triple H and the house show, I injured my back on top of everything else, so I really started taking way too many painkillers. So I wasn't in my right mind. So there were some instances where I had interactions with Vince where I was probably talking out my ass. And you got to be able to handle this stuff. You got to keep your head straight. You can't be getting high and drunk and acting stupid. You got to be you got to be all business, and you got to handle yourself in a very professional manner and be able to handle a little bit of rejection, man, because it comes, and you can't let it eat you up, because there's a lot of very frail egos in the wrestling business. And if you're one of those people, you're not going to make it, because you're going to get your little feelings hurt the first time somebody goes back on a promise, and you'll never make it. So Yeah, now, that's not to say just let people stomp all over you either. One thing I learned, and it's funny, I told Scott and Kevin Nash this. I saw them not too long ago, and I said, it's interesting. I hear a lot of other wrestlers doing shoot interviews, and they just completely blast the Clique. They hate them, and they're still bitter. To this day, 20-plus years later, they're bitter, and they hate the Clique members. And I was that way early on, but I came to the realization with all the stuff I went through personally the realization I came to was anybody can get themselves over, and it's your responsibility to do so. Even if they're not giving you the biggest push to the moon and making you the biggest star, you can go out there and tear the house down every night, even in a losing effort. It's not about losing, it's about how you lose. I think Kurt Hennig used to say that. It's not about losing, it's about how you lose. And anybody can take certain steps to get themselves over and raise their own stock. And that was something I was not smart to at the time. And that was a conversation I had, like I said, with Kevin and Scott. I was like, I used to hate you guys, but the reality is if I wanted to change my situation, I could have. I could have started getting myself over even in losing efforts. And they just kind of looked at me and they're like, you're exactly right. That's the truth. Regardless of how much money, yes, they had power. They had a lot of power. But, Vince always had this saying, the cream always rises to the top. And that is so true. Even in the wrestling business, where you're depending on somebody else pushing you, a promoter, you can still get over. That's why you see guys that are so good in this business, even though they get beat down by whatever promoters and companies they work for, people still talk about them, and there's always opportunities for them because they're really good. They're really good in the ring, and they know how to get themselves over. Like, look at a guy like Dolph Ziggler. I mean, I call him the modern-day Kurt Hennig. He's a really good wrestler. I've never met him personally. When I watch him wrestle, there's just something a lot different than most of the other guys or girls that are working right now. He is head and shoulders above most people in terms of talent. So, you can get yourself over. You just got to figure out how to do it. And you got to be professional, like I said. And I was lacking in a lot of those departments back when I was there, and it ended up it didn't end well for me. So.
No, you kind of keep saying it didn't end well for you. Is it because of the way you wanted to leave, or they wanted you to go on? Was it like a mutual thing? Like, what was the kind of the problem there? I mean, obviously you become more pissed off and you become more angry and you don't like the direction. But what's their attitude towards you?
And it was really interesting because during this time, as I said before, I was irrational, and I was still having these meetings at TV with Vince. I would demand having a meeting with him, and he would meet with me, but he would always have Jerry Briscoe sitting next to him, like he was worried that I was going to try to do something. I don't think I was that irrational, but I was just pissed off. And I always felt like I could speak my mind to Vince because of the way I walked up to him and just spoke to him when I got my job, Mm-hmm. So because of that, I felt like I could always just talk to him. And you got to be careful the way you do that. And there was a moment, I'll never forget, and I've told this story before. There was a moment where I was just really frustrated, and they were beating me. I think it was around the time where Mankind beat me on TV, and I don't remember who else. And then eventually T.L. Hopper beat me. And I just went to Vince. I stood right in front of him with Jerry Briscoe standing next to him. I said, if you're not going to use me any better than this, just send me home because I'm sick of it. And Vince kind of looked at me like I was crazy. One of the big rules in wrestling is don't ever take yourself out of the game. And I was basically doing that right in front of him. I was taking myself out of the game. And he came up with a different option. He said, how about if I send you to work in Memphis, Tennessee for a while, which is kind of a demotion. But the funny thing about it is he offered to pay me like $1,000 a week, which was way more than I was making at that time because I was barely on TV and I wasn't on the road. So I was like, that sounds great. I'd love to do it as long as you put it in writing. And I think that was the thing that killed me. As soon as I said that, he had this look on his face. And he didn't say anything. He said, yes, of course. But then I think at the next TV, he sent Briscoe into supposedly. See, I don't even know if this is for sure, but Briscoe came up to me in the locker room. He said, Vince said you can go ahead on home. And I think we were in like Vancouver. And I remember because I was hanging with Austin. I remember we went to the hotel that afternoon, and I shaved the rest of the hair off of my head, and we just got drunk. And I hung around, I think, an extra day, just laying by the pool drunk. And then the day after that, I got on the plane home and didn't look back. But that's how it happened. And I don't even know if Vince really told Briscoe that, because it was weird. Later on, I had guys calling me saying, dude, you were booked to be in Europe. You're on the booking sheet. So, maybe Briscoe just came up and took it upon himself to send me home without Vince's okay, or maybe Vince never even said that. And, these are all things I would think about later on, but that's how it went down. I kind of tried to make a stand, and Vince basically, or the office in general, they just called me on it and said, well, okay, go ahead on home. And you don't realize how horrible of a feeling that is when Briscoe said you can go ahead on home. I ain't gonna lie, man, I choked up a little bit. I mean, I kept my shit together. I didn't cry in front of him or nothing, but I felt this sinking feeling in my gut, because I realized, holy shit, it's probably over. And then that's when I started really getting drunk and messed up on drugs. But that's how it all went down, man.
That is crazy, kind of the way it can happen. Boom, just like that in an instant, and just be gone from the WWF just like that. Did you ever think of maybe just saying, okay, if you guys say I'm on the booking sheet for Europe, and then all of a sudden just end up, backstage or whatever, and take that trip to Europe? Did you ever kind of think of that? Any regrets there?
Well, I heard about the booking sheets later on, so it was well past when it happened.
Oh, okay.
And of course I was messed up and paranoid, and I thought guys were just trying to wind me up anyway. But later on, I did try to come back, and to kind of teach me a lesson, they made me try out again. Like, I had to try out in dark matches. I wrestled Paul Diamond, I think, in one, and I wrestled Pierre, PCO. I wrestled him. I wrestled him in another one. And they weren't the greatest matches, in the world. And again, I was just so far out there, man. I was in no condition to come back. It's probably a good thing I didn't go back, because if I did, and the fact that they really weren't drug testing at that time, 1998 or so, I probably would end up being one of the dead guys. But I did try to go back, and I also went and tried out one night at a Nitro in a dark match for WCW. And it didn't go well either. Yeah, it's on the internet too, somewhere.
Do you remember kind of the circumstances of being able to get the dark match with WCW?
J.J. Dillon brought me in after I kind of just walked in the back one day at a Nitro. I just walked in a suit, kind of like the way I walked up to Vince. Well, I did the same thing at Nitro. I just walked in, and all the guys came up, and they were real nice to me because they thought the office brought me in, but nobody brought me in. I just walked in. And J.J. Dillon came up and handed me his card and said, you need to call me, and we're going to, we want to bring you up and do this and do that and blah, blah, blah. And I think in the next couple of days, everybody started realizing, hey, nobody brought him up. And but they still gave me a tryout, and then J.J. brought me up for that tryout. And like I said, it wasn't a great match. I didn't wrestle as the dumpster or nothing. I just wore a singlet, and I wrestled this dude that was kind of, not very, he was kind of stiff. He moved around like stiff in the ring, and some stuff went wrong, and I kind of kicked him a few times, and I think they didn't like that too much. Arn Anderson called me a crowbar after that, and so I didn't do too well there either. And then I just really just went off the grid. I disappeared for like the next 23 years. I was gone. Or 20-something years. But yeah, that was it.
Well, a brief return in 2001 to the WWF for the WrestleMania 17 Battle Royal, but then basically gone.
Yeah, yeah. I was in no condition to be there, but it was pretty cool. WrestleMania 17, walking out in front of that crowd. But it was awkward in the back because I was so different, man. I had lost a lot of weight because I was really strung out on drugs. I was at that time going to a methadone clinic in Miami, so I had to get extra methadone to take with me so I didn't get sick, dope sick. And it was just weird, you know. I felt embarrassed, so I really didn't hang around with a lot of the guys and talk to a lot of the guys. I just kind of kept to myself. I mean, I spoke to some of the guys I was friends with a little bit, but then that was it. And then went out and did that match and just kind of got paid and got the hell out of there. That's kind of how that worked. But that was my WrestleMania moment. I was strung out on drugs, yeah.
Shit, yeah. Not good and not a great kind of memory of WrestleMania, that moment. How did they get in touch with you to be a part of it? Was it one of those things where, you know, Vince reaches out or one of the agents reaches out?
No, they didn't reach out to me. I reached out to them. It was I was working in Florida with a small company. I had a wrestling ring, and I was kind of working with these guys, kind of helping them book. I was setting the ring up. I was wrestling some, and one of the other wrestlers came up to me one day. He goes, "You know, they're having a gimmick battle royal. You need to be in that." And I was like, and I was kind of blowing him off, and he kept pushing me. He goes, "You need to call Droese." So I finally just went ahead and called Droese, and Droese was like, "Where have you been?" You know, like they had been looking for me or something. But he said, "Yeah, we can use you," and they brought me up for it.
And obviously, you know, you had a lot of drug issues then and a lot of, you know, problems with that kind of stuff. Is that a big issue or was a big issue in the wrestling business with not just you but a lot of guys then?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because when I was there, when I first started, they were drug testing, very strict drug testing policy. But there was a loophole. You could not take steroids. You could not take illegal drugs like smoking pot or doing cocaine or any of that stuff. But the loophole was you could take any prescription drugs you wanted as long as you wrote it down on the drug test sheet when you were taking a drug test. They would ask you, what medications are you taking? As long as you wrote it down, you didn't have to show them a prescription. And, of course, I lived in Miami, brother, so I knew all kinds of people selling pills on the street. So I had, and a lot of times when we were down in Texas, we'd go across the damn border to Mexico and get tons of drugs. And the thing is, you just write it on the sheet, and they wouldn't check to see if you had a prescription for it. Everybody was taking Somas, and, like, nobody had prescriptions for Somas. So, yes, it became an issue for me. You know, a lot of guys were married and had kids, and when they would go home from the road, they would become a dad or a husband. I didn't have any of that. I went home and partied more with my buddies and went back on the road and still partied. And that's what became such a big problem for me. Interestingly, about a year after I left, I was still talking to some of the guys. Savio, I was talking to Savio on the phone, Savio Vega, and he goes, "There's no more drug tests." I was like, "What?" He goes, "There's no more drug tests. They sent out a memo saying that it costs too much to drug test people. It's not cost effective," or something was the word they used. And I just remember telling Savio, I said, "This is going to be bad." Because yeah. I knew how some of those guys were partying. And if you drop the reins and if you cut them loose to start doing illegal drugs, I said, it's not going to be good. And that's when all these guys started dying. It's because guys were really going crazy off using illegal drugs and dying in hotel rooms and all that stuff. So in a lot of ways, when I talk to people about the way I unceremoniously left the wrestling business, I have to look back and realize, man, maybe it was good that I wasn't there when they quit drug testing. Because I was one of the craziest ones out there, you know. So I can't imagine what would have happened. So maybe it was for the better, you know. Maybe that's why I'm still here. But you know, all these experiences I look back on, and I regret it a lot for a long time, but I don't anymore. I don't regret it. you know, I learned a lot about life in general, and I'm able to talk to people nowadays and try to help people that are having some of the same kinds of struggles. And on occasion, during some of these weekend shows, I get to talk to some of the young guys coming up in the business and give them a little bit of advice, you know, and again, I'm just having fun with it. But I learned a lot, and I don't regret things anymore. You know, I had to learn a lot of lessons the hard way, but I think it was all meant to be. So it is what it is, and I'm glad that I'm still here.
Absolutely, definitely. And as we head towards the wind down, we head towards the finish. I mean, you've wrestled. We mentioned a lot of guys you wrestled, but there's so many other guys, especially in the WWF time period, where there's such good workers and good hands and just big, great names. Just even throw out guys like Brooklyn Brawler and Barry Horowitz and Adam Bomb and all these guys that you wrestled in WWF. I mean, Diesel and obviously we mentioned Triple H stuff. Do you have some favorite matches looking back?
You know, working with Pierre, when he came back as Jean-Pierre Lafitte, the pirate gimmick.
Yep.
He was always, matter of fact, somebody just posted a house show match between me and him at Rutherford, East Rutherford. It was always fun to work with him. I worked with the Hog Farmer just a couple times, and that was really fun. I only worked with Austin once, maybe, or twice or something. It was funny because we always rode together, but we never really worked. But when we did, it was funny. We just kind of laughed the whole time. You know, guys like that, anytime I could work, back when Savio was Quang, we always had fun. That was pretty much, I had the opportunity to work with Owen and Davey Boy. They were a tag team against me and Bob Holly on a couple of occasions, and that was fun. So, yeah, there was a lot of interesting people. But I never got to work with the top-tier guys like a Shawn Michaels or an Undertaker or a Bret Hart. Of course, because I was stuck in the babyface role for so long, I didn't get a chance to work with those guys. But I wish I would have had an opportunity to work with like a Shawn Michaels or a Bret Hart for sure.
Yeah, you know, different time frame, or they, you know, maybe they turned to heel or something. You definitely would have been able to work with those guys, and that would have been awesome. Big man, kind of little man stuff would have been great. Is that something that you liked playing the heel, or you prefer the heel, or was something where you were just more comfortable playing the face?
Well, if I could do it over, if I could go back and do it over, one thing I would have done was came in as, I remember that it was actually, and again, it was during the time when Shane McMahon and I were sitting at that desk at the studio, and he was telling me about the name, and he kind of asked me if I wanted to be a babyface or a heel. And I remember telling him I wanted to be a babyface because I was so used to working as a babyface down in Florida. But I, you know, looking back, I realized some of the biggest baby faces in that company started as heels. It's a whole lot easier to make people hate you than make people like you. And with the direction that that company was slowly moving in at that time, you know, they were towards the Stone Cold era, the Rock era later on. If you were one of these cookie cutter good guys smiling and putting the thumbs up and all that, it got old really fast. I mean, look what they tried to do with The Rock as Rocky Maivia. Luckily, he took a hold of it and changed it and became a heel in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I just feel like it's easier to come in and start as a heel and then make the turn to the big baby face, let the crowd almost turn you, and you get over that much bigger.
As far as Duke the Dumpster Droese or just you in general in wrestling, what do you think is the lasting legacy when people kind of look back at Duke the Dumpster Droese or look back at you and your career and everywhere you've been and how long you wrestled and everything like that? What do you think is kind of the stamp that you leave behind on wrestling?
Well, I think I was an interesting character during an interesting time. You know, a lot of the feedback I get from fans nowadays, interestingly, is, man, you were a really big dude that could really move well in the ring, and they stuck you with a shitty gimmick, which they didn't stick me with it. I came in with it, but it was just kind of the way things were then. But I was an interesting character during an interesting time. I guess people are kind of saying that was part of the golden era of wrestling, which I don't know about that. It was the new generation era is what it was,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
exactly. Yep.
But I was there with a lot of interesting people, had a lot of fun. I learned a lot about the business and myself, and I think for the most part that'll be my lasting legacy. Because of the lessons I've learned, I'm able to have fun with it now and interact with fans in a much different way. And there's no expectations. I'm not trying to get rich or anything. I'm just having fun and being myself. And I think that's probably the most important legacy that can come from all of this is where I have ended up now. That's the most important thing.
That is very cool. And as far as now, and are you very happy with kind of what you're doing now and being able to wrestle part-time? Is that something that's very just relaxing for you and very kind of cool to kind of, be that veteran presence in the locker room and stuff, and be that veteran presence in life, really?
Yeah, it is. It's fun now. I'm having a great time with it. I'm not trying to make some big move back to the big time, big leagues. And the locker rooms have always been fun places, whether it was the locker room in the WWF or a locker room here locally at Pikeville, Tennessee. It's still fun to get in there and talk to people at different levels of this business, the newcomers, the guys that have been around a while. It's always fun to be there. And yes, I am having fun with it now.
And I just want to say, as far as looking back at your career, I remember just like, man, this is a big guy. He's huge. He can move well. He works well. Vince kind of likes those big guys. It's just that, you never know what's going to happen backstage, I guess, with politics and stuff. But it's just like, man, this guy is a huge guy, but a great worker. I remember I was always thinking, I was like, yeah, the gimmick kind of worked for that era, though. It was a new generation era and those larger-than-life characters. But I thought you worked well for that era and did pretty damn good. I mean, not a lot of guys have the 3-year run that you had in WWF, or almost 3-year run. So, you kind of have to say, wow, it's a pretty impressive.
Well, I appreciate that. It was fun. It was fun while it lasted. I don't have this illustrious 20 or 30 year WWF career, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's all good. It was fun while it lasted. I had a great time there and made a lot of good friends, and I'm reconnecting with a lot of these people now. I'm talking to Stone Cold again for the first time in ages. I'm talking to Savio and other wrestlers on the phone and sometimes through social media and stuff like that. The social media is an amazing thing because I did literally disappear for a long time. So when I came back, the whole social media thing was new to me. But, yeah, it's a pretty amazing thing. It's good. I'm happy to be alive, and I'm happy to still be here, man. And I'm going to continue to have fun with it.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews,